In this video I want to talk about the morale system in Panzer Corps and two separate but related subjects, disorder and panic. Disorder is the way in which a formation, a battalion, takes incoming fire and other battlefield influences and progressively is reduced in combat effectiveness. Disorder can be accumulated and rallied off. You can gain and lose it over time, and with a reasonably low amount of incoming fire you can sustain a low rate of disorder indefinitely. But if you reach higher levels of disorder, then progressively your ability to fight is degraded, and eventually you may become completely ineffective. Panic is what happens when you fail a morale test and the battalion is forced to fall back, regroup and hopefully return to the line. The number of times it can do so depends on its quality. A recruit or a very low quality battalion may only be able to do that once. The most elite units can rally and return up to 4 times. So panic is influenced by disorder. The more disorder points you have, the more likely you are to fail a morale test. But just increasing disorder does not of itself cause you to panic or to fall back. Okay, so let's look at disorder first, and as I've indicated, this is mostly caused by incoming fire, although it can come from other causes like, for example, moving through poor terrain for certain classes of units. But normally, as I say, from incoming fire, and a fire attack will typically cause between 1 up to a maximum, rarely, of 3 points of disorder. Now, the way I show disorder on my battlefield is by putting a little die next to the unit. So in this case, this battalion, which is what a German Africa Corps infantry battalion, 3 infantry companies at the front and some attachments at the back, it has just taken 2 points of disorder. Now, at the end of each turn, formations can rally off some of the disorder that they have received. Any unit that doesn't move automatically loses 1 disorder point. Regular units also automatically lose a disorder point at the end of a turn. If you've got decorated leaders with your battalions, then each leader will rally off a point. And if you've had a particularly good decision die throw, then you may get some auto rally points which you can take off your battalions. And there are various other ways in which you can lose disorder as well. So even for an ordinary regular unit, if you sit still, then you can rally off 2 disorder points automatically every turn. And that means that low volumes of incoming fire can be sustained pretty much indefinitely. So if you want to break your opponent's units, if you want to make them ineffective, you really need to focus your fire to try and put in a volume of incoming fire and therefore disorder, which they're unable to rally off. And if that happens, there are a couple of breakpoints which change the status of the unit. So if a battalion has accumulated 3 disorder points, it becomes what is called suppressed. And to indicate that, I use a little pink cube there. Technically speaking, you don't need an indicator like that because you can, you know automatically if a unit has 3 disorder points, then it is suppressed. But the pink token is a reminder to me that the battalion is in that state, and therefore there are certain combat effects. And in particular, when it's firing, it uses a poorer fire die. I'll talk about what those are in the combat segment, but suffice it to say that their fire effect is has less impact on the enemy, and they can also only move at half rate. The other thing that suppression does, if you're an AFV unit, you can't overrun enemy units. Now, if you continue to sustain incoming fire and the disorder grows, eventually you will reach 6 disorder points. That's the next break point. And what happens then is that you go from being suppressed to being fragmented. And fragmented is considerably worse. As it suggests, the organisation of the battalion is falling apart. Individual companies, platoons and squads are losing contact with each other. They're going to ground. They're interested in self-preservation rather than acting as part of a unit. And generally the control and communications is failing. And when a unit is fragmented, then it can't fire at all, it can't move at all, And it also conducts an immediate morale test, which I'll come to in a moment, and obviously, as before, it can't conduct overruns if it's an AFV. So the increasing disruption means that the formation becomes increasingly less able to fight and less able to influence the battle. But of itself, as I said, this disruption does not cause the unit to panic or to fall back, but it may well influence the morale tests if the disruption increases. So, having talked about disorder, which can reduce the effectiveness of a fighting unit, let's talk about panic, which can cause the unit to break and fall back. So on the screen at the moment are the various reasons why you may take a morale test, and the most common one, I think by far, is incoming fire in large volumes, and particularly taking disorder from incoming fire. If you accumulate 3 or more disorder markers in one turn from fire, then you have to take a morale test. If you take them all in one go from a single attack, then you have to take the morale test straight away. But if they accumulate across a number of attacks during a turn, then you take the morale test at the end of the turn. Other reasons, being close to another formation which panics or falls back, and close assault and overrun when units are getting up close and personal, are also the occasions for a number of morale tests. And there's another singular one there for partisan units. The first time they get close to an enemy, there's a morale test to see if they will actually stand and fight. So, having seen the reasons why you take a morale test, let's look at the mechanics of actually doing so. And like many mechanics in Panzer Korps, this is based on the size of the dice, the number of faces on the dice that you're using. And obviously a larger dice, a D12, will give you a chance of scoring much higher than a D6. So the column there, top left in this table, shows you for the various different levels of quality of your formations the size of dice that you use for rolling on the morale chart. So a partisan or militia unit, the poorest ones, will only use a D6. Your elite and hardened formations, the very best you've got, will roll a D12. And essentially what you do is you roll your dice and you add some modifiers, which are down there at the bottom of this table, and essentially you try and get more than 4. If you score more than 4, then there is no effect. The modifiers, as you can see there, probably the most important one is third from the end there, the number of disorder markers. That's the one where you can really affect the result of your enemy's morale test by pouring on the disorder. As you can see, you get benefits for having decorated leaders with the formation. As I've said before, these represent experienced officers and NCOs who can keep the men facing the enemy. You get benefits for being in cover, for being fanatics, and so on. You roll the dice, and if you score, as I say, more than 4, nothing happens. If you get exactly 4, you take 1 disorder marker. 3, you could take 2. If you score 2, then you fall back, and you add 3 disorder markers. So you can see how disorder starts to snowball. And if you score less, if you score 1 or less, then that's when you panic. You pull back a normal move plus a random amount, so you fall back quite a considerable distance, and you add 4 disorder markers to your total. Now, when you've panicked, at the end of the panic move back, you don't have to then stop panicking. That happens automatically if you still have a number of chances remaining, and the number of chances again is based on the quality of your troops, and is shown in the column there at the top, which says panic recovery. And the number there tells you the number of times you can panic and fall back and then still return to the fight. So the very poorest troops, partisans, they don't get any second chances. Once they've panicked once, they retreat from the field. They filter off and disappear to the back, and unless it's a 2-day battle, that's the last you'll see of them. Militia are allowed 1 return to the fray, and I won't read all the numbers out, but you can see all the way back up to the very best troops, which can return 4 times. So what happens is you panic, you fall back that variable distance, and you then stop. And assuming that you can rally off enough disorder, because typically after a panic you've got a large number of disorder markers, you can reduce your state from presumably fragmented eventually to the point where you can move, return to battle and fight again. You need to keep track. I've got a way I keep a little piece of paper next to each unit and keep track of the number of panic events, because once a unit has panicked the maximum number of times, then, like the partisans in my earlier example, it doesn't stop. It falls back and then it continues to move backwards. It's not removed from the table manually, it actually has to move backwards. And there are ways in which other units can get close and cause further damage, further disorder, and even by surrounding a unit cause it to surrender and disappear. So a battalion which has panicked permanently physically falls back behind the lines, and as I say, if it's a one-day battle, that's the last you'll see of it. But if there's a night move and a second day, then it is possible to recover from panic, to recover some order, and to return to the fray. So this is a very important mechanic. This is the core, really, of the battle. Winning a battle really is done by putting disorder on your enemy battalions, causing them to panic, causing them to fall back, and then when they return, repeating until eventually they can no longer stand the pressure and they fall away completely. Units in panic are subtracted from the totals, for example, when you are looking at the force integrity, and your ultimate objective is to panic at least 60% of your opponent's formations, which causes them to take overall morale checks and ultimately will break the entire force and the entire army. So the core of fighting in Panzer Corps is about disorder and panic. It's not mostly about causing casualties and removing the battalions of your enemy. It's about causing them to become disordered, causing them to become panicked, and causing them to do that sufficient times that they can no longer recover and have to fall back off the field, and eventually you can then move forward, capture your objectives and win the battle.